Great. Okay, so we are recording now. Okay, let's start. Good morning and good evening to all, and welcome to the Data-Driven Community virtual meeting. My name is Ronen Arieli, and I'm honored to be the moderator today. A few words about the Data-Driven Community. We manage two branches. The first one is a weekly meeting of the Cloud Data-Driven User Group, like today. The second branch that we manage is an annual conference called Future Data-Driven Summit. Just to give some upcoming, so next week on September 14, we will host a Sunday show, and we will discuss about innovative ways for manipulating text in natural languages. The Future Data-Driven Summit 2023, which I mentioned, will held on September 27. This year, by the way, it's going to be much bigger than before. We have 5 tracks in parallel, 10 hours, and more than 50 speakers. So you really don't want to miss it. I will put the link in the chat after I will finish the introduction. Please use the chat during the session for questions and discussions. This is a user group. We can go a bit beyond the time. Feel free to use the chat for discussions as well. You are also welcome to use the reactions to show that you like something. You can clap your hand, for example. If you hear something that you love, you can use the heart to show that you love it. It's not interfere the presenter. It's just a small icon that will go on the screen. Use it freely. Today we are hosting Josephine Abash. Josephine is Microsoft Data Platform MVP and a very familiar speaker in the community event. By the way, I mentioned the Future Data-Driven Summit, which is coming in 3 weeks. Josephine will speak there also. So you can meet her again in a different topic. Josephine, you are welcome to share your screen and take the control. Maybe you can add a few words about yourself.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. So you should see now. Okay, good. So yeah, I will be at the conference, the Future Data-Driven Conference later this month. I will be talking about terraforming your Azure SQL resources. So that is a fun thing. Terraform is actually a lot of fun. I actually like it a lot. So I'll be doing that later this month. But today we're going to talk about migrating SQL Server to Azure Managed Instance, hopefully without getting a migraine. That remains to be seen, I suppose, as you're going through it. So again, yes, I'm Josephine, and I am an MVP with lots of DBA experience. I have been doing DBA work for a long time now. I'm actually a database engineer. I do a lot of different stuff in my job now, but I did a lot of migrations of SQL Server to SQL Server, and there was some managed instance thrown in there too. I actually do have a 4-part series, a 4-project series at Manning that goes over all of this in much greater detail than I can do in this window for this presentation. So that is out there as a resource as well. I'm on Twitter as Hello SQL Kitty. I also blog at sqlkitty.com. So I will take pauses throughout the presentation where you can ask some questions. If you want to put stuff in the chat, that's cool. I'll ask Ronakin if you can relay that to me when I get to the question part, just so you know there's going to be pauses. There's a lot of information in here, so hopefully you have some questions for me. So I broke this down into 4 parts here so that I could say, we're going to prepare for the migration, right? Like, what are you going to do before you even get started kind of things? Like, are you going to clean up stuff, going to audit stuff? What are you going to move, right? That kind of stuff. And then I created a second part of it, which is setting up your cloud database, meaning setting up your managed instance, getting server level settings and stuff like that over there. And then I have a migrate, right? That's the main part of this here, where we are actually using the database migration service in Azure to migrate all your databases up to your managed instance. And then finally, we do the last part of it, which like sometimes I'm like, we're done with the migration. They still have more to do, right? We still have to monitor and audit our databases, make sure that we know what's going on in our cloud databases. You may already be doing that in your on-prem, so that's the natural conclusion to the process here. So to begin with the preparation, right? I'm a big fan of auditing, so that's I say I love it. And my husband's like, do you really love auditing? Yeah, I actually love auditing because I love catching people doing things that they're not supposed to do and then going to them and saying, hey, what are you doing there? They kind of like look over their shoulder, like, how could she know? I'm not standing behind them. But so in this case, I would say SQL Server audit for that. And there's a database, there's a tool you can use, the Microsoft Data Migration Assistant. So that'll help you analyze what can and can't move. Of course, I'm a big fan of cleaning up sometimes during migrations, sometimes not. I put that in here because I want you to be aware that maybe you don't want to move everything. Certainly you can't move unsupported objects, and we'll go through that. But unused objects may be a good time to clean up. I'm of 2 minds about that. I don't want to break the migration, and I also want to clean things up. So I like to keep track of like what I might clean up maybe after I'm done migrating even. Just depends. If you know something's completely unused, like a whole database, then I'd rather not move it. So then I would create a checklist. Now this checklist can be a whole bunch of different things that we'll go through, and I made some recommendations. So we'll take a look at that in a sec. So to start with, the database, the Data Migration Assistant, it's a tool that you can download for free from Microsoft, and it helps you assess what kind of issues you may encounter. So in this case, we're going to go from SQL Server to Managed Instance. You can do a bunch of stuff. You can do SQL Server to SQL Server. You can do SQL Server to Azure SQL. There's a bunch of different source and target types in here, by the way. So it's not just for this type of SQL Server to Managed Instance migration. And so here you say you could migrate as well. There's a migration option you'll see there. I'm not going to go through that here because that migration, it's not, I wouldn't say that's good for like a large database, highly used. Maybe if you have a really teeny tiny database you want to plop up into the cloud, but that's kind of easy to do any number of ways. So I just use this for assessing. An important point is that it might not warn you of all issues you can encounter. So there's some things that it might not tell you about, which I go into some more detail on a further slide, but just so you know, it's always important, as you may, if you're a DBA, you know that you always want to test this in lower environments. So you want to migrate hopefully from, dev or QA before you start doing it in prod anyway, just so you get your feet wet and you know what the process is going to look like even with this kind of thing. Even in SQL Server to SQL Server migrations, I would always do something in lower environment first, just to be sure. So once you've said, I'm going to assess what you're going to assess, you picked your source and target, you come to the screen that shows you your options, like what you want to assess.
1 second,
I always check.
Josephine.
Oh yeah. Okay.
1 second, just
yeah.
There was a question, but it's technical question. So just to make sure that everyone can see, yes, we are sharing a screen now. If you don't see the screen, so the problem is in your side. You can log out and log in the meeting again. Okay, so Mike, if you don't see the screen, please join again.
Okay, cool. Okay. Very good. So you have these 2 options here. I always check both. So since you want to see what database compatibility issues you might have, you also want to see any parity, feature parity issues. So I want to see everything, right? I want to see both types. And so here's one of the things I mentioned earlier, that it's not going to say to you when you're assessing in this DMA tool that Azure uses Azure Active Directory, whereas SQL Server uses Active Directory. There is a difference. So when your users or accounts, like if you have an app, like service accounts or users logging into your SQL Server now using Active Directory authentication, they will have to change the way they log. The authentication method is slightly different in managed instance. It's just something to keep in mind, that you're going to have to accommodate that kind of thing, you know, users training, you know, whatever you'll have to go about. And the DMA is not going to tell you that stuff. I'm honestly, I'll show you the results of what I've seen. I've seen it's like 99% or more compatibility. Otherwise, it's not like you're going to find a lot of stuff where SQL Server to manage instance is going to break a lot of stuff. And in this case, I actually had to create something. So you actually saw something. There was a feature parity, which is PowerShell job step is not supported in a managed instance. So you'd have to rework that job somehow, get rid of it, what have you. So your feature parities are listed up here in the top half of the slide. And then you've got your database compatibility issues. It'll list back all the compatibility, whatever SQL Server version you're on. I'm sure you can do 2012. Not sure you can do 2008 R2 up to managed instance, but I'm sure you can do 2012 and up of SQL Server. It does mention 2008, so you might be able to go. Oh gosh, I hope you don't have 2008s left on-prem for your sake. But I know for certain that you can do 2012 and up into managed instance at least. And so it will show you if there's any breaking changes. I haven't seen any breaking changes here. It'll show you behavior changes, deprecated features, and so on. Like I said, 99% compatibility. So I've really not seen anything that's like, oh boy, except like a PowerShell job set, for instance. So you're going to find it's very compatible with SQL Server. So that's the assessments. I like to do all this assessment beforehand. There is a way to do it as part of the migration, but I personally like to assess before I get the server set up and all the other stuff and manage instance and all that. And I do that at the front end here and see if there's anything I need to clean up and mitigate long before I'm setting up my bits and pieces that for the migration itself. Then I mentioned the SQL Server audit tips. Well, I mentioned SQL Server audit. Now I'm mentioning the tips. I use this on all prod SQL servers anyway. Like I love auditing. I use it in my Azure. I have Azure SQL databases now, and I use it in that as well. Mainly, I want to see DDL and security changes in that case. Like it's on a regular day-to-day basis. I don't want to see every select, insert, update, delete, everything that happens. And if you haven't used SQL Server audit before, if you audit everything, it can be very cumbersome, especially on a busy server. And you'll see all kinds of things SQL Server does behind the scenes. It does an amazing amount of things to support queries. So you see somebody running a select, and then you see all this SQL Server is doing all this system tables, this and that's in the background. Now that user's not doing that itself. It's just what SQL Server is doing to support it. So I like to say, don't be careful to over audit. You don't want to just get everything. Generally speaking, I may audit more during a migration, and I will put a caveat on that because I did have a SQL Server audit. Basically, when I tried to stop it on a really busy production server at a couple of jobs ago, we had these really intense servers. We had to audit for PCI, so we had very strict auditing requirements that we had to. Oh, here's Mango. He's joined. He has to join to every presentation. He's like a very extroverted guy, and he loves auditing too. By the way, he's told me while I was sleeping. No, I'm just kidding. So anyway, this is not standard. I'm not saying this will happen, especially not in Azure. I haven't seen any issues up there. But a really busy production server, you're trying to get every select. Like people had to decrypt credit cards as part of their job, so we had to know. Boy, oh boy, I tried to turn it off, and then it froze up. It should just get a timeout, exceeded period, something error, and then not stop because it says I'm busy auditing, right? So it can't stop until it's done auditing things, but it keeps auditing anyway. And it wound up freezing up transactions. I had to restart the service. I was like, oops, oops. Anyway, that should not happen. But the moral of the story is that if you audit so much that you can't find anything or see anything, there's no point. So really, when I say audit more, I usually say that only in the case that I think this database really is not used, and I'm going to audit it for a while to see. So we don't have to migrate it at all, that kind of thing. Anyway, so I have a bunch of stuff up in my GitHub. So my GitHub is SQL Kitty out there, and got a ton of stuff in there about SQL Server audit, Azure SQL database audit, that kind of stuff. So there's a bunch of juicy stuff out there for you. So I don't actually have a slide specifically for create checklist because I left this more open-ended. For me, a checklist is a technical set of steps of what you're going to do during a migration. It may include things like what I'm going to move, what I'm not going to move. It's sort of a sanity check for yourself. And I do have more examples out in the Manning projects I did, and it was sort of like a checklist of what I'm going to move, what I'm not going to move. But honestly, I create a very detailed checklist of step 1, step 2, because when I'm in the middle of a migration, I don't want to be figuring out like, oh, what am I supposed to be doing right now? No, don't want that stress in the middle of a migration, right? So that's kind of my rationale behind. I love checklists to keep me sane in the middle of a production migration, especially. Anyway, I'll take a break for a sec. Is there anything in the chat that somebody put question-wise?
There was no question, but I want to give my 2 cents, if I may. This is my personal opinion, but this is what I consult my client as well. Do not migrate as it is. This is not a task that we do every day. It's not. It's something that we do once in a while. Use this opportunity to redesign your database. There are a lot of differences regarding performance and things that you might need to do differently if you want to get the best performance. So use this opportunity to rethink, migrate it carefully, only what you need.
Yeah, I agree. I've tried to do that a lot at places I've been. Sometimes the databases are so big, there's so many things going on, and there's so many moving parts and pieces and teams that would need to get involved. We wind up just slapping it over there too. So there, I can see the pros to paring down, and then sometimes you have these gigantic databases and it's like 10 development teams have to get involved, and you're like, well, as ops people, we just have that, but we got to migrate this, right?
Those cases, I would say that those cases are more important to use this opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm working with databases of a bit more than 100 terabyte SQL Server, 130 at this point. And believe me, if I have the opportunity like this to, I call it like start clean, so I would do it, but you cannot. So if you do migrate, think about this. This is a one-time task. Think about this.
Yeah,
you will not have another opportunity.
I know, it's true. Yeah, I know there's a lot of kicking the can down the road in the ops world, and it's for sure. Okay, so next so this is where we set up our cloud database. And so I say, what I do a lot, I love sanity checks for myself, because we're actually, as part of this part of the plan, that's part of the process, we are going to migrate the server level objects right after we create our managed instance. We're going to migrate them all with PowerShell. But what I like to do first is I create a baseline of just some configuration set, like server level, trace settings, stuff like that. Because I like to run that script first, create my managed instance, migrate to server level objects, and then I run my script again. It's just a little quick sanity check. DBA tools has never failed me, but I just always like these little bits that I can add on throughout the process to say, yep, green check mark that we've done that. So let's step through this a little bit here. So one thing to note with managed instance, there's just these certain types of subscriptions that you can run it. This a lot of subscriptions, by the way. So most likely you're going to be able to create this. So just so you know, if you don't see it, it could very well be that it's your type of subscription that's maybe not part of that. That's just so that you know that information. And here's my configuration baseline that I mentioned. So this script, I don't expect you to read from this and be able to create a script. I do have a repository with presentations and sample scripts out in my GitHub as well. Again, that's the SQL Kitty out in GitHub. So you can grab this script. I do have a resources slide with some links as well. So these are included on that. So this is, like I said, it's just getting trace flags. It's getting things you would get with SP configure. So you would see what's set in here. I just grab this information and stash that to the side on my on-prem SQL Server, right? Somewhere more SQL Server. Well, I mean, you could run in a VM in Azure. Say, I don't know, maybe you want to migrate off of your SQL Server VMs in Azure. You could do that as well to a managed instance. So in this case, this would work for that. And then I always like to note. Oh yeah,
the checklist is on the GitHub as well.
The checklist is not. I could put a sample one out there, though. I make a note of what I did in this case.
I think it's a great question. So
yeah, okay. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I could put out. It's very basic for the projects themselves that I did at Manning. It's basically what you want to include, what you don't want to include. But I could put a sample checklist kind of together, though. I can do that and put it in my GitHub. It's not there now, so but. So the important thing to keep in mind, so it's if you've done Azure SQL database, you'll know there's some very cheap options like Basic. You could do $5 a month or whatever. It's super cheap. I'm not, that wouldn't really handle production workloads, but there's some very inexpensive options, whereas managed instance is not the case. The cheapest I saw was like $400 a month. It depends on your subscription. So in my Visual Studio subscription versus at work at Dev Test, and then versus all these different subscriptions we had with different costs. So it's about $1 an hour, I would say, depending on your subscription, sometimes maybe less, sometimes more. And of course, depends on the specs that you choose, which kind of reminds me of trying to spec out. I don't think that there's a calculator that I know of. I want to kind of look into that, of how you could spec out managed instance versus say, you have 8 cores and 128 gigs of RAM, whatever you have on your on-prem or your VM SQL Server, right? What does that equate to in a managed instance? I have no idea, honestly. I'll just be honest with you. So it's kind of what I did was just a matter of picking the lowest, not the absolute lowest, because I know if a prod workload, we had workloads at my last company that were, Microsoft said, don't even put those on a VM in Azure because there's so much IO. Nope, just don't even. They're going to take up a whole server in the data center because there was so much. So we had to keep those on-prem in SQL Server. So we weren't just blindly migrating to managed instance either. There was some thought in it that's like, okay, well, that can't go to managed instance because it's just not the compute. We're just not going to get that right now. So anyway, so that's just to say, this here will look a lot like if you set up Azure SQL database. It's a lot of the same kind of what subscription, what resource group, just clicking through here and everything. I have not terraformed because I said I was going to show you Azure SQL database Terraform. I have not terraformed a managed instance, which that actually could be interesting. So yeah, I was just like, Terraform MI. Anyway, so you set this all up. In this case, I was only using SQL Auth for the project that I was doing to make it easy for people, because in doing a simple project in the Manning project series that I did, this was to show you a basic setup, not to get you from, oh my God, this is a huge workload in SQL Server to managed instance, but just to show you all the steps. So that's why I picked SQL Auth here, just to make it easy to do that whole migration, right? Normally they would have AD, right? All that would have, all my SQL servers had AD Auth, the mixed with SQL. So one thing to note is that the managed instance requires a dedicated VNet. Now, that's not really an issue if you're setting up in your own environment, but or you're the person at your company that does all the tech, everything tech. So you click, yep, okay. Now, if you had some other networking team, or you have some other networking setup in your environment in Azure, there could be some kind of conflict, and you definitely want to check that, you're not saying, oh, create a VNet and interferes with something else that they've been doing. So thankfully at my last company we did have a networking team, and they were like, okay, hold up a sec, let me get you a VNet, and then you can use that for the managed instance. So just so you know, that's one gotcha. If you just go in your own environment, set it up, boom, it'll create a VNet for you. It's just note, don't want to like make all the networking people where you work unhappy because you did something that was like, oops, that messed everything up, right? So some tips with managed instance. So last I checked, this is still the case, is that it can take up to 6 hours to create. 30 minutes is in preview as of last November-ish. I think they were announcing that it was coming. I hadn't seen it yet. I have not checked recently though, because I haven't created one that recently. It could be 30 minutes now, which is wonderful because waiting 6 hours is a long time. And then stop is in preview, because honestly, the only way without that to stop costs is, say you just want to test managed instance, you'd have to destroy it and then recreate it and potentially wait 6 hours again. So thankfully stop is in preview. And again, it was rolling out slowly to subscriptions. So I'm hoping it has rolled out to all of them now. And for testing, I was just enabling public endpoint, because then you can just easily access it. I wouldn't do this for production. Again, this is another kind of like on the backs of giants thing. For me, I had a great DevOps, like networking people to help me with some of this. So we had some private endpoint stuff set up. But thing to note with the public endpoint, you connect the name of your managed instance that you created .public. It will give you what I have come to call a short GUID, because it'll give you this X's here mean some random alphanumeric code it's very short. So I call it short GUID. So you need that, then .database.windows.net, which is familiar if you've used Azure SQL database. Then you have to connect on port 3342. It cannot, 1433. So this is how they've set it up. You'll have to do it like this. So that's just a little bit of tips for the connecting. It's like super high level, I know, but just because I figured this stuff out, now you can have it on a nice slide instead of having to, dig through a bunch of other stuff. So then your managed instance is set up after hopefully 30 minutes and not 6 hours. And so then you can migrate your server level objects. So I just use DBA tools. It's wonderful. It does a lot of good stuff. If you haven't used it before, it's got a wonderful, it's really interesting, the set of tools for doing database administration, not just migration stuff. So in this case, main thing to note is you want to exclude databases here, because you don't want it going and trying to like get it back up and doing all that stuff, because you're going to do that in the next part here, the migration service, because I'm guessing you have a production workloads that are not super tiny, that they can't just like be backed up and plopped into the cloud, because that's why we have all these tools, because usually we don't have tiny little production databases. So anyway, at this point, DBA tools has put all my server level settings into the managed instance. But like I said at the beginning, I did that quick little script to get my server level settings or trace flags and stuff. And now I run that same script on my managed instance as I did on my SQL Server or my VM, and I compare them. DBA tools has never failed me, but it's just, like I said, I just like doing a little sanity check to make sure that I see some of the same things going, that I see everything is the same on both sides. So that is setting up. This is now you've got your managed instance in place. You've got your server settings ready to go. Now we're ready to migrate the databases. So I take a pause to see if there's any questions in the chat.
No, well, okay.
Okay.
So
Cool.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Can you not use SQL Server
Yeah, we
Management
do it.
Studio?
1 second before you start. I see your hand. I think that it's your hand up. It's Lisa put in the hand. I want to ask everyone, if you do want to speak and the chat is not enough, put your hand and we will give you the time, but prefer to use the chat. And do not use the voice if you did not got permission, if you did not ask to. Okay?
Sorry.
We cannot otherwise manage tens of people that are here. You can continue.
Okay, my question was that can we not use SQL Server Management Studios to do all of this?
Well, I suppose you could like script out all your server level stuff. Let's say you have like agent jobs and link servers and all kinds of things, right? So you could script all that out and then put in your managed instance. I just like this DBA tool because it just literally gets everything.
Gotcha.
Because maybe you didn't, I'm not saying you don't know, but I'm saying maybe I don't even know what's all at the server level. Sometimes there's things like nested, like credentials and all kinds of things all over the place, right? That way, it just grabs everything and plops it over there.
Okay, thank you.
We have another person, Lisa. You put your hand up. Okay, maybe it was a mistake. I will put it down. You can continue.
Okay, so like I said, we have our managed instance ready to go. It's got the server level settings. And now we're ready to migrate our databases. So basically, we can do that with the database migration service. And there we go. Okay, yep, he's back. He's very happy today. He loves migrating databases to Azure as much as he loves auditing. Mango loves everything, really. He even loves the trash truck. So anyway, so we have
There
our
will be a day that our cats and dogs will replace us.
yeah. He'll be like, yeah, I call him Cat DBA because he comes into my work meetings too. So I'm like, here he is. Here's our little cat database engineer. So Azure actually changed this process when I was midstream and creating all these projects actually, but it was they made it better. So there's a migration service that you set up in the portal, but then you use Azure Data Studio to configure it, which actually is a lot nicer. And it's used to all be in the portal. And then you can perform an online migration. You could do an offline one too. But that begs the question that, maybe it's not highly critical. Maybe it's not that big. You could probably do that in a number of ways then. So we're going to go through an online one here. So you have the least amount of downtime, no data loss kind of thing. So then we will verify our migration, right? So we're going to check all our database configuration settings. Basically, we're going to do that on the VM, probably do that in advance because I'm going to do the database settings on my VM in advance. I'm going to get all those settings, see what they are, and then apply them at the end once my databases are online after the migration. So one big thing I should put in like 100-point font that you then couldn't read on the slide, but the thing is configuring the VPN or express route is like a whole project. I do a whole presentation unto its own for this. I will tell you that you cannot do the migration from a VM, especially on-prem, to managed instance without VPN or express route setup, because that's the pipe that's going to connect your data center to Azure. And so the DMS will not be able to communicate with your data center if you do not have one of the other of those. I honestly cannot tell you how to do that because it's complicated. And I have a link on the resources slide to help you. Again, thankfully, I had a team of people I work with who they have experience. They had express route set up. Now express route is more expensive than VPN. So if you don't have either of those already, I would say VPN's it's more affordable. But if you need a dedicated, more, dedicated setup to the cloud, you would go with express route, which is what we had. So that's the first caveat there. So before you set up the DMS in Azure Data Studio, for instance, I mentioned that you have to set up a migration service in Azure, which is actually just registering this Microsoft.data migration. And you also need a storage account, because it's going to put your backups in there so that they can be restored to your managed instance. And importantly, because I tested this, I thought, oh, I could be fancy and leave off checksum, because with checksum will make your backups run more slowly, because it's got to do that checksum on every single backup. You take a full when you're ready to restore that full. I mean, you could leave it in your agent jobs. So you probably have agent jobs to back up your databases. You could add with checksum to your full diffs and logs and let her rip. But you need that first full backup to start the process of setting up this DMS, right? Because it's going to need that full to start. So like if you've done log shipping before, this is going to feel very similar. I mean, not the setup of it, but the concept behind it, right? You're taking log backups, you're moving them, it puts them up in storage, and then it restores them to manage it. So this keeps pushing your logs up there, right? So we're in Azure Data Studio now. You have to install the Azure SQL migration extension to get going. You will connect. This is your SQL Server on-prem. Like I said, you could do this with a VM in Azure as well, but I just said on-prem because the idea of moving to the cloud to a managed service, I just use on-prem in that case, saying, okay, I'm moving from my data center up to Azure. So you connect to your SQL Server here. This is not your managed instance. This is actually, the SQL Server itself. And you do this connect. I never told you at the beginning, I called it magic wand services because I always felt like somebody expects me to wave a magic wand to make things happen. Sometimes I say, here's our options. And then they say, well, we can't do any of those, but we want to fix the performance problems or we want to do something. I'm like, well, you have these 5 options and my magic wand is broken. So I don't know what else, what do you expect us to do? We have performance problems or we can do one of these 5 things to fix it. So anyway, that's how I got magic wand services. So you would right click whatever database you want to migrate and then say manage. And it'll bring you to this dashboard now, which is the migration dashboard. Now in this screen, if you had already set up some other migrations, you would see them listed down below here. You could start a new migration. You could say migrate to Azure SQL. And what Azure SQL means in this case is it gives you options like what do you want to go to and from and all kinds of stuff. It basically walks you through step by step, like this steps here, to how you go from where you are to where you're going to go, right? From SQL Server to managed instance. So like I mentioned earlier, we did that assessment in the DMA, the data migration assistant, right? That little tool you can install on your local machine. Here, it's going to take you through that again. It's going to assess them. It's going to give you results or recommendations. Now, I just like to do that in advance of getting to this point. What if you find something at the beginning that's absolutely not fixable, and now you're like, oh, geez, I just have a managed instance, I'm ready to move. And then you find something that's just a deal breaker. And so now I don't know, because we've had that where we have to go to SQL Server for a while. We just can't get to managed instance yet. So you want to, personally, I think you want to assess first. But they're going to do it here again because they want to know. They don't know you did it before. They want to know if there's a problem because you can't go if there's some big problem blocking you. So you did your assessment before probably. So you'll breeze through that, hopefully. And then you set up your target, right? Your target is your managed instance. You put all that good information in there. Migration mode, online or offline. So I'm sure you know of your database administrators. Offline means, there's downtime. You could have data loss potentially if you didn't stop everything, because like sometimes it's hard to know what all's hitting. Something comes in there, plops in there, and you're in the offline migration. Now you've got data going to the old ones somehow. And anyway, I do everything online. There's still risks of that. Less downtime, less wait, like practically no downtime really. But anyway, that's a whole nother discussion for like a database forum. But so then you have to do a source configuration, right? So that's your SQL Server. So you're going to tell it where it's coming from. And then you also have to install a self-hosted integration runtime, because that's going to help say, okay, because part of the source configuration is saying, oh, I want you to get my backups from this network location. But then Azure Database, the migration service has to be able to access that location, pull the files. It's going to copy the files up to the storage account that you set up before you started all this and put them in there. And then it's going to restore them to your managed instance. So that self-hosted integration runtime is a tool that I install, you should install on the source server, like the SQL Server itself. That's where it gets installed. So it can go and move your files. It's like I said, like log shipping your files up. Then you get a summary to see everything that you decided to do, right? So now you've got it set up, and it's going to show this. Now, if you'd completed something before, it would show that, but I had not. And now I have this one in progress. This is my Magic Wand services in progress. You can click on this to see the status. You can see like what backups it's restored, what it's doing, what's in progress, stuff like that. You know, it's like this down here in this corner of this slide. It'll show you the fulls, the log, you know, list everything out, what it did. So like these are your fulls restored. You've been shipping logs up there. Now, just making sure that you've update your agent jobs with checksum, right? You know, like just how you set up log shipping, but with checksum, right? You know, you gotta like, you make sure all your logs are flowing up there, and when you're ready to migrate, you stop your applications, preferably. We've had some issues with that because sometimes in ops, we don't know all the things to stop. So I get it. You know, sometimes you do the best you can and stop users from using the on-prem database, you know, your SQL Server as much as possible. Like I use SP who is active. I'll use SP who 2, checking like, see what's going on in there, who's connected, even if they're sleeping, that's not kicking people out of there, right? Take a final log backup with checksum. And, you know, if I was doing on-prem to on-prem, it would be like a tail log, and I would take it offline. I'd take the on-prem one offline, so that way everybody's done. I will tell you in this case, you cannot take your on-prem, your SQL Server databases offline, because the managed instance, the DMS, the migration service will freak out because it cannot see the database. So you literally have to take a final log backup with checksum, leave it online, which makes me a little nervous. There was a suggestion by a participant earlier in the year who said maybe you could put it in read only. And that's an interesting suggestion I have not tested because I haven't had to migrate since. But that's because I don't like the idea of leaving, when I take a log back at the final log back, like a tail log backup, right? I'm gonna take it offline so nobody can hit that thing. Boom, we're done. It's offline. So I know, but you can't do that with the migration service. So you got to go in and verify in your dashboard that the final backup is restored, and then you can move on to complete your cutover, right? But yeah, if you take this offline, it does not like that. And you may very well have to start over again, because I brought it back online and there was some kind of chaos, and I tested it before. Didn't just go to prod and test this on the fly in the day of the migration, right? That's how I found out these little blips, like you need checksum. You can't take it offline. Test. So now you start the cutover. There's a button on the dashboard that says complete cutover on that. When you're inside, you know, looking at this status, there's a button up there that says complete. I probably could have added that, the whole screenshot in here, but complete cutover. Now it's going to tell you this. It's hilarious. I literally wrote this slide before that you just saw. I wrote these things down, and then I looked at the screenshot I would use, and that's exactly what it says to do, because I've done a lot of migrations. And so, you know, you got to stop the incoming transactions. And I know, I get it. Sometimes that's hard. And then you create that final log backup on the network share. The DMS is going to pull it, right? It's going to pull it up to the storage account and restore it. So, you know, it might take a couple minutes, which you got to leave database online for. And so that's why on the side, I'm seeing is kind of anything coming through, is anything hitting it at that moment. Hopefully not. So then you can see this, it'll say, like the check that there's no log backups to restore, 0, right? So you want to see, you confirm, like, yes, I'm an idiot if this doesn't say 0 and I want to cut over, right? Yeah, I confirm that it says 0, because it'll let you, I think it'll let you complete it even if it says something's pending, because it's just doing what you say. I haven't tested it because I don't want to do that, right? So I complete the cutover. Once it's completed, boom, immediately take that database offline over there. So the SQL Server offline database, because then I know I don't need it online anymore. I cut over. I still got to test that read-only option because that actually might be a valid way. I'm not guaranteeing, but it's an interesting suggestion. So now you're done. Well, you're not done because you're never done, right? It's like cleaning a toilet. You're never done. I mean, you got to clean it again. You got to do all your DBA things, but you're not done because now you have to get your database settings, because you might have had database level configuration stuff in your SQL Server. So now you're going to take the stuff you applied. You got, you said you ran this script, which by the way is in my GitHub too, is you get your database scope stuff and put it on your managed instance. So now you got all your database configuration settings. And you did that before you took your database offline, because you did that at the front, right? Because you did get your database settings before peacefully you're in the before the chaos, hopefully not chaos, begins of your migration. You've already got your database settings, and now you're just applying them to the managed instance because you're at the end, and you're still not done. Because now you're at the point where you're troubleshooting, you're configuring, you're checking the log of your old SQL Server because some of the application's not working and it's not hitting the managed instance. God, all the things that happen in a migration that, they never go completely smoothly. So it's not just you, it's me too. So anyway, I'll take a break.
We have small questions. Yeah, we'll use this for a small question that we have from Saifi Guderia. Will it slow down the online migration if the database transaction intensive? And it continues, so maybe migration should be done in the weekend.
Oh yeah, I always do prime migrations on the weekend, or at the very least off hours. Yeah, I mean, like an evening, you might be able to get away with an evening.
I love the off hours because there are some companies like ours which are working more in the weekend.
Yeah,
so
it
off
depends.
hours. That's
yeah, it depends. Yeah, whatever's off hours to you. Like I usually work for places that are like busiest Monday through Friday of the day. But yeah, then you have to account for, does your business have like European office? Because I sit in America. So do you have Europe? Do you have Asia? Yeah, you just have to factor when the quietest. Geez, I had to do migrations at like 2 a.m. because when I worked at a credit card processing company, so that's the quietest time for us. So you got to find that time what's quietest for you.
That's it. That was the last question for now.
Okay. Cool. So, like I said, I mean, you're never really done, and that sounds depressing and exhausting, but it's not, because you can automate and a lot of stuff. So you're not just sitting around big on automations. You're not just sitting around doing a bunch of manual stuff. You could have automated. So it's not that terrible in the end. I'm still trying to figure out how to automate toilet cleaning without hiring a cleaning person, but that's another story. That's a different story. So this is where we're at. We're going to configure auditing. Probably going to do my alerting first. Not sure I put them in that order, but I'm going to do my alerting first, because you don't want to be surprised about things. You don't want to be surprised. You don't want to know you ran out of storage, or you have a CPU usage issue. Somebody else tells you. That's the simple stuff. You want to configure auditing, right? At this point, you're going to want to know if people are changing things like DDL, security type stuff. And then finally, I got this from Tracy Boggiano because I needed another bit for my monitor audit, but this actually was perfect. And this is a security check, and we'll kind of go over what that means here in a couple minutes. It is actually very important to do, and I think a lot of this stuff especially auditing and the security check, kind of just fall off the radar because I get how it is. It's very busy at work, and these may be not a priority to management or other people. And they're like, what do DBAs do anyway? What are you just sitting on your hands all the time until they have a problem that they need you for, right? So I get that, but these are very important. And in fact, at my old company, I implemented SQL Server Audit. Nobody asked me to. Nobody wanted it. Nobody cared. But I got tired of people saying, that's the database. Well, I didn't have any proof that nobody had made any changes that broke something. I didn't even know. So that's why I implemented SQL Server Audit specifically, because it was like, well, I could tell me what date you thought it worked, and I can go back, and I kept at least 30 days. So I could go back and say, well, I can tell you right now, nothing changed. Like, there was no schema changes, there were no perm changes. I don't know if data changed because I'm not tracking all that. So that's more app side, but I can tell you for sure nothing changed. So I'm not sure how it's the database's fault now. So the main thing was SQL Server. That's the difference. So like I said, I'm in my GitHub, I've got a lot of SQL Server stuff. I in fact have a whole auditing book I wrote with A-Press. A-Press published that last September, I guess, actually. Geez, it seems like 5 years ago. So it goes through all of this. It goes to all auditing. It's all auditing. But if you know SQL Server Audit, you can use my free stuff in GitHub. For that is you need a storage account to hold the files, because you don't have a VM, right? You don't have a VM to store the files, because SQL Server Audit needs the disk on a VM, right? But here you need a storage account. Then you have to use the URL to get to the audit destination, the storage account, and then you have to query that URL. That's the only difference in managed instance. It's very easy. I, in fact, have a whole presentation on Azure SQL database, not managed instance, because it is so different. In this case, managed instance has got a very similar feel. Like I said, that 99% plus compatibility makes it very easy to use your SQL Server skills on. So then the alerting, right? The monitoring, the alerting. So I set up things like CPU or memory or storage space kind of things. You create an alert action group, so you get notified. I get an email in this case. I think there's other options though, if you have other ways you want to be alerted to this, and so that somebody doesn't come to you and be like, oh, well, the database stopped working, because you can only read when you run out of storage. Nobody can write anymore. And or you CPU memory usage, stuff like that, right? So you got all that stuff set up, so somebody's not telling you for the basics. And so finally, that security check I mentioned, right? There's some CIS benchmarks. This works for SQL Server too, right? This is not just managed instance, but I highly recommend using it on all your servers. You will be wowed all the things that it can come up with. So in this case, I use DBA checks, PowerShell module. You need Pester as well for this to work. And I did this again is my GitHub SQL Kitty. This script's out there, so you don't have to do you have a photographic memory so you can memorize this whole thing? No, the script's out there. So I excluded all these checks you'll see here, because I either thought I didn't care about them, or they're not applicable to managed instance, right? So you could take out all the exclusions and just run it on your managed instance. You could see all the stuff that comes up. I just want to clean it up a little, because especially in the case of, taking you through a test case in a project, to keep it cleaner so you don't see all kinds of junk you don't know what to do with. So this is good. And you work through it. It's not like, oh my God, hair on fire, do everything right now. But this is good to know, because it's one of those things, like I said, with auditing, it may be one of those things that management or coworkers or whoever thinks that should be on the back burner, but maybe you slowly chip away at it to get that stuff done. Because what I like to do actually works for the business, but it's also for my own peace of mind. So that it's like middle of the night, the middle of the day, whenever it is, something's not getting hacked or broken or something, because now it's on me. So I admit it's a selfish motivation, but my selfish motivations also help the company in the end. So it's a win-win. So does anybody have any questions? And we're going to pause here for my drink break at this moment.
Yeah, we just got a question. Don't they have internal tool in the cloud environment that alert you for those issues?
Wait, so what, like the security issues you mean?
I assume that, you can speak with your
Can I say it?
microphone. Yeah,
Yes. So
clarify.
basically like log space issues, data space issues, stuff like that, like
Mhm.
blocking, locking, aren't there alert mechanisms that automatically send out alert saying this is happening? Because
Not,
in Prem you have Netcool and stuff like that that monitors all of this and then alerts the DBAs
mhm.
if something like that happens,
Oh,
right?
yeah, you could still use tools like that you use on-prem with managed instance. You could still point them at your managed instance and have that work, by the way, if you wanted to do that. Because we had monitoring tools, then you can point them, right? Okay. But otherwise in Azure, yeah, there's ways to set up alerts. Like there's Azure Monitor type stuff where you can set up alerts to hit the database and alert on those too. I've seen people do it with
Gotcha.
agent jobs, even in SQL Server too. You can set up agent
Right.
jobs. I'm not as big a fan of the agent job
If I
method, but
can add in,
yeah.
if I can add
But
here
on
my
an
2
enterprise
cents.
level,
First of all, you have extended event. Extended event supported in the Azure, even in the Azure database. This
Yeah.
is a great way in order to monitor and to catch everything. Next, in order to send the alert, so the answer is yes, you can use Azure Logic Apps, for example, or you can use Azure Function and send those alert by email.
gotcha. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
there's a lot of ways. I mean, honestly, we had tooling for our on-prem stuff. So sometimes we just pointed at the cloud stuff because we already had a license anyway. But yeah, there's like tons of ways to do this. Okay, so here we are, and my font's kind of weird here because it's like, long story short, I used to have PowerPoint and then I decided to upgrade. I have a Mac for this, for my personal stuff. And anyway, I'm like the pet peeve of mine when I see typos and like font, like things running together anyway. So I gotta fix that. So we prepare to migrate and right? We analyze, we audit, we clean up, we create the checklist. We find out if stuff is unsupported, we clean it up. We get tidy. We know what we're gonna do going forward. We go set up our cloud database. We create a baseline of our server settings, right? We set up our managed instance. We get those server level objects over there. We do a little quick cross check. And you may or may not need to do that. That's just part of my process. I like that extra sanity check, right? And then we migrate with our DMS. So a little bit of Azure portal setup with the storage account and of course, having your VPN or your express route and doing all that stuff, get that stuff ready. You get into your Azure Data Studio and set up all your migration. You complete your migration there, get your database settings over onto your managed instance. You're good to go. Now you're online, you're over there, everything's pointed. Gosh, I make that sound so easy in like 30 seconds. Now you're migrated. Anyway, so then you're not done, of course, because you've got to set up your alerts and your monitoring and do your security check. And of course, like I said, still not done. And this slide deck, 100% total success. I had to leave it there because I thought it was so funny. I was like, yay, like 99.999 some success maybe. So like I said, naturally things come up in the migration. I think that's everybody. I've never had a migration where something didn't come up in the middle that didn't come up in testing. I just assume something will go wrong. I don't know what. It's not I don't call it bad. It's about how you view stress, they say. How do you view stress? Is stress good? Or do you think it's bad and it impacts your whole outlook? So I just look at it as good. Anyway, I saw this thing. I said pet peeve at the beginning, my pet peeve about typos. And I have to tell you this because I found this interesting tidbit the other day that said, why do you have a pet peeve? Don't have any pet peeves. Don't keep peeves as pets because that's bad. It's like, well, how is that healthy anyway? So sorry, side tidbit. So this is an overview, very high level of the whole process, right? And I'm not saying go buy this series I built. I don't even I don't even get a lot of money from it anyway, so it's not like a big deal to me. But you know, if you want more help, step by step, walk you through it. And my co-author on it is a mentor, or last I knew she was. So there's support through the process. So if you need more, there is more. That's the main thing. I'm always happy to field questions you have too. So I'm here in case you have a question about this presentation. So it's not like, hey, go away, go buy my projects. No, I'll be there to answer some questions. These are the resources I mentioned, which actually does not have a link about the VPN or ExpressRoute, but honestly, you can Google that. It's like, you know, Azure VPN, and it'll walk you through the like 15,000 steps that you have to do. No, it's not that bad, but I kind of gave up at a certain point. Honestly, even me, I was like, oh Lord, this is a lot. So there's some resources for you. I want to thank the people who came up with this slide deck, because I wanted little arrows to go this way. You're migrating, you're going this. Yeah, so thank you to those people. And then finally, this is where you can find me. You can email me, you can hit me up on Twitter. I blog regularly on SQL Kitty. So if you have questions, feel free to hit me up.
Let's
Thank you
open,
for having me.
everyone, you can open camera. Thanks a lot. We will share the recording and everything, but please feel free now to open camera if you have more questions. This is a great time. And let me just share the closing slide. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, you just don't see the right one. Let's go to the end. Okay, so again, thanks a lot for this session. It was a great session, Josephine. We are recording this meeting, so you can watch it again. If you can put all the link that you have just shown us in the chat, it will be useful until people will be able to watch the recording. And if anyone have more questions, so let's do it now before we close the meeting. I see that we have a few questions from Tony. What are the most complained resources you can think of to sell the SQL? I'm not sure what you mean, Josephine. Can you check the chat?
Oh yeah,
and,
here.
if it's
Let me see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What are the most compelling? Okay. Sell a. Aha. Yeah. Right. Well, a compelling reason to sell. Yeah, manages over. So I guess if there's like somebody's real hot and bothered, like, cause I know the executives sometimes get excited to, we've got to go to the cloud, And I'm not a big fan of putting SQL Server in a VM in Azure, for example. And then I would say in that case, managed instance, because it makes for an easy migration. To try to go from SQL Server, say, to Azure SQL database is difficult. When you have established workloads, that could be very difficult. So that's in the case where we want to say we must get off of SQL Server. We got to get out of our data center into the cloud. And I would say managed instance would be the easiest transition. Now, like new workloads, I would say I would put them in Azure SQL database to start. I mean, I'm a fan of Postgres as well, so that's a whole nother conversation. But for migrating, I would say you just get the easiest path without having to manage VMs and all kinds of resources. So that's probably the most compelling reason. Is there a way to parallel run replicate while things are bedding in?
The answer is yes. I wanted to give a small tip, and this is exactly the answer. I just wanted to give one sentence that you can use a simple replication between on-premise and managed instance as a first step before you do everything, and then you continue using on-premises. It's all sync. During this time, it's all the data is synced, and when you're ready and you tested the managed instance, simply make it the primary, and then
right. Yeah. You can set up an availability group. I don't know what version you have to be on SQL Server though. You have to be on a higher version to put it in AG, I think. But yeah, you could do that. I'm not sure. Somebody said is lower cost in space and hardware. That depends, I think, because if you already have a data center and you've already paid for it, we ran into this, and I won't say that's wrong. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that in the case of if you already have a data center and you already have the resources, if you're moving out of it, then certainly, yeah. I just think like having a VM in Azure is a lot more administration overhead too. So I think there's less costs in terms of that, in terms of the managed instance versus a VM too. So it may be lower cost in space and hardware versus the VM in Azure as well, like Safi said there, I think.
That's correct. Just to clarify, I wasn't talking about VM. I was talking about direct replication between the on-premises and the managed instance. It is supported. It's working great.
Like
it's working even
itself.
better with SQL Server 2022.
Yeah.
And this is a great option, exactly for what you asked in question 2, to keep it all alive, synced, and only when you are ready, then you just close one, continue the other one.
Yeah. There is still sort of a difficulty because there's like I don't know how they handle that with the like say you put a managed instance in an availability group with like SQL Server 2022 or whatever, and then you fail over. There's a different authentication method though with Azure Active Directory versus AD, so you may still have glitches in the migration, like failing over is my only concern because there's a little difference. But you can test that beforehand.
You put your live system working with the on-premises until the managed instance is ready. When you think that the managed instance is ready, they are still continue to sync between them. The replication is working. You start to work with the managed instance. Only when you are sure that everything is working, including what you say is obviously correctly,
exactly.
authentication and everything. If everything is working, then drop the on-premises and continue with the managed instance.
Right.
This way, you are synced, you have zero downtime. It costs more because you have both system working at the same time. But if you can do it, it's one way to do it.
Yeah, for sure. I'll say it's never like super easy to migrate. Migrate period between SQL servers sometimes is complicated. So yeah, you're not alone when I get it's not always like super straightforward and easy. And that's, I guess that's why I always say that's why we have jobs, I suppose, because we have these complicated things to do.
So if you can
have an AG with a secondary in the cloud. I'm not sure. I think managed instance may require you to be on SQL Server 2022 or at least 19. So you may have to upgrade your SQL Server first.
It's
so the reason I was thinking that was
direction.
if I could have the primary on site and have the secondary on the cloud, and then if I have to do the migration, I just flip everything off to the cloud, and that becomes the primary.
Yeah. That should work.
Okay. Thank you.
And I mentioned it in the chat in the beginning, and regarding what was just spoken now, regarding the versions. If you are working with SQL Server 2022, so you have full compatibility, you can go both directions. You can go from the managed instance to the on-premises as well. If you are using an older version from 2012, at least this is the officially supported from 2012, so you can go from on-premises to the managed instance.
And then not back again is what you're saying, right? You can't ever fail back. Yeah.
Back
okay,
is,
that makes sense.
This is one of the new features in 2022. From 2022, you can just go and take a backup from the managed instance and open it locally. It's one of the, in my opinion, awesome new option that we have.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
Okay, do
I
we
don't
have
like that.
more
I
questions?
hate that when you can fail to something and then not fail. I love that you can fail back and forth now between 2022 and the cloud because
Exactly
it's,
what I said
yeah.
several years.
yeah, it's
That's
what it's much, much better. I agree. It feels a lot safer. Yeah.
Yeah, I said it, and many people say that probably this is why they have done it.
Mhm.
It's really problematic if you can go only one direction and you cannot go back. It's
Mhm,
make
it
it
is. Mhm.
so
Yeah.
people use 2022. That's always better. Let me see if we have more questions. No, I think that you covered everything, Josephina. So thanks a lot for great session, and we will meet everyone next week and 3 weeks from now. Remember, we have the Future Data Driven Summit. This is the big event of the community, and Josephina will be with us there as well.
Yeah, I will.
So
Again.
bye bye
Yeah, thanks for
everyone.
having me. Yeah, take care, everybody. Bye.